भज जनरञ्जन यशोदानन्दन भज जनरञ्जन यमुनतीरा वनचारि यमुनतीरा वनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन भज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन भज जनरंजन यमुनतीरा वनचारि यमुनतीरा वनचारि जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा शील प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा प्रभुपादा शील प्रभुपादा जो परमांश परिलक्ष्य स्तुत सदस्य श्रीमती स्वामी ग्रेसिस भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी शील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक आचार्य शील प्रभुपाद की जय। जो परमहंस परिलक्ष्य स्तुत सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जेवं विष्णु पार्षद गौर किशोरदास बाबा जी महाराज की जय। जेवं विष्णु पार्षद श्री भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय। जेवं विष्णु पाद वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबू महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सागर गुणा श्री जी गोपाल भट्टदास अविनाश गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से गौ श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य भगवान नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत दादा स्वसादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपगोपनाथ श्याम गुण राधा कुंड गिरिवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा महेश दर्शन भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। कंकमाई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देव की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वंदे की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन कीजिए, ग्रंथा श्रीमद् भागवतम कीजिए, इस्कॉन रत्मान गुरुवंत कीजिए, समाज भक्तों कीजिए, गौर परिमानंद हरि हरि बोल. All glories to the assembled bodies. All glories to the assembled bodies. All glories to the assembled bodies. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Divim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Patreshu Nityam Bhagavad Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtihi. Hare Krishna. Welcome you all to this Tuesday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 20, text 52 and 53. First we'll read text 52. Tapasa vidyaya yukto yogena susamadhina rishikeshaha sasarjabhim mata prajaha. Tapasa vidyaya yukto yogena susamadhina rishikeshaha sasarjabhim mata prajaha. Tapasa vidyaya yukto yogena susamadhina rishikeshaha sasarjabhim mata Prajaha. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Having equipped himself with austere penance, adoration, mental concentration, and absorption in devotion, accompanied by dispassion, and having controlled his senses, Brahma, the self-born living creature, evolved great sages as his beloved sons. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The ritualistic performances of sacrifice are meant for material economic development. In other words, they are meant to keep the body in good condition for cultivation of spiritual knowledge. But for actual attainment of spiritual knowledge, other qualifications are needed. What is essential is vidya, or worship of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes the word yoga is used to refer to the gymnastic performances of different bodily postures which help mental concentration. Generally, the different bodily postures in the yoga system are accepted by less intelligent men to be the end of yoga, but actually they are meant to concentrate the mind upon the super soul. After creating persons for economic development, Brahma created sages who would set the example for spiritual realization. Text 53. Tebhyash chaikaikashaha swasya dehashyam sham adhat ajaha yadyat samadhiyogar di tapo vidya viraktimat. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. To each one of these sons, the unborn creator of the universe gave a part of his own body, which was characterized by deep meditation, mental concentration, supernatural power, austerity, adoration, and renunciation. The word Viraktimat in this verse means possessed of the qualification of renunciation. Spiritual realization cannot be attained by materialistic persons. For those who are addicted to sense enjoyment, spiritual realization is not possible. In Bhagavad Gita, it is stated that those who are too attached to seeking material possessions and material enjoyment cannot reach yoga samadhi, absorption in Krishna consciousness. Propaganda that one can enjoy this life materially and at the same time spiritually advance is simply bogus. The principles of renunciations are four: to avoid illicit sex, to avoid meat eating, to avoid intoxication, and to avoid gambling. These four principles are called tapasya, or austerity. To absorb the mind in the Supreme, in Krishna consciousness, is the process of spiritual realization. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purport of the third chapter, 20th chapter, the third canto, 20th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Conversation between Maitreya and Vidura. Om Jnanatimirandasya Dhananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakata Mahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Vidapakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Stipam Satvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha Ye Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandho Jagatpade Gopesha Govika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Taptakanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarupyascha Kvasandupya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gauri Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Oham karoti vachalam pungam nandeli padamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinatarnam Paramanam Shri Chaitanya Ishwar. Hare Krishna. So we see in these two verses how Lord Brahma created the rishis and then gave them empowerment. Now, before these two verses, we have seen that Brahma created the Manu. Now, Manus were created to establish a process of economic development. Now, economic development does not mean only to make money or have a sustenance, but it's a question of sustenance to keep the body and soul together, not for advancement of material prosperity. So after creating the Manus for setting an example for economic development, Lord Brahma created the Rishis. Now these Rishis, they are all great personalities who actually set an example for spiritual realization or spiritual perfection. And they show to the people in general as to how one should progress spiritually based on the scriptures. They don't speculate. So it is said that these sages sometimes, some of them, they propagate karma kanda, some propagate jnana kanda, some propagate renunciation, and some propagate bhakti yoga. Example of bhakti yoga is Narad Muni himself. He propagates bhakti yoga. But on the whole, these sages, the purpose of these sages is to look at the welfare of the society. And so in the process, they travel all around. Now, even if we look at there are two steps for spiritual realization. Now, one step is to go, like Sri Prabhupada always gives an example of going step by step through the ladder, or the other one is to go by a lift. Now, lift is the easiest process, and going step by step takes some time, some efforts, some austerities. So these are two steps for spiritual advancement. Now, we will go to have some understanding of the rishis before the processes. The 7 sages is given in the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam are Kashyapa, Atri, Vashishta, Vishwamitra, Gautama, Jamadagni, and Bharadwaja. And it said that these 7 rishis, they stay in the 7 stars which revolve around the pole star where Dhruva Maharaj resides. And these rishis are the brahmanas for the higher category, like the demigods, etc., for the higher planetary systems. Not only for the higher planetary system, for all, including ours. Now, their concern is only to see how the inhabitants of these planetary systems progress spiritually. And there are 14 Manus in a day of Brahma, and whenever there is a change of Manu, the rishis, the demigods, all are changed. And one Manu reigns for 71 Divya Yugas, and each Divya Yuga consisting of Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali Yuga. So the rishis reign like this for 71 Divya Yugas, and thereafter they are changed. It is like a post, just like demigods. Now, coming to the purport today, even for worship of the Lord, whether by a step-by-step process or by the Bhakti Yoga process, one requires some understanding of the knowledge of the Supreme Lord, for which again one has to refer to the scriptures to get that knowledge, because knowledge cannot be attained by mental speculation. They have to be referred to the scriptures as to who God is and how God can be worshipped. And for one to understand the scriptures, one must again approach a guru or a sadhu. Now, if we look at the first sloka, it is mentioned as to how generally yoga is used as a bodily exercise. But it is not just merely a bodily exercise, but it's a system whereby one is able to control his mind, his senses, so as to see the Paramatma who is situated within the heart. Now, spiritual realization cannot take place unless and until one is mind and the senses are controlled. So, in the step-by-step process, what happens is that everyone does not fit into, it does not get attracted by Bhakti Yoga process. So they take up Karma Kanda process, and then they gradually progress to Jnana Kanda. Then they progress to Dhyana Kanda, and finally reach the Bhakti Yoga process. Now, in each of these categories also, without understanding the cause of the cause, that is the Supreme Lord, one cannot progress. For example, in Karma Kanda section, one can become a Karma Yoga only when he renounces the results of his fruity work. That means one is not attached to his fruity work, whatever he performs, for which one should know who the Lord is, to whom he should give the results. So if he does the wrong results, if he does the wrong thing, he can get the wrong results also. So for which we will look at some of the examples. So after Karma Yoga, then after many births, one may reach a stage, it's not definite, how long we don't know, one may reach a stage of Jnana Yoga, by which one understands or comes to the stage of understand the impersonal form of the Lord. And they are those who want to merge into the Brahman effulgence. And then after many births, one may come to progress from there to reach a stage of Dhyana Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga, which we will discuss. And then again, Dhyana Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga is meant to see the Paramatma within the heart. And that also takes a lot of time, efforts to reach a stage of controlling the mind and the senses. And over a process may reach to the stage of understanding Bhagwan, the full supreme feature of the Supreme Lord. Now, this is one process. And the other process is Bhakti Yoga, whereby one directly worships Bhagwan feature of the feature of the Supreme Lord. So today's this thing is about Ashtanga Yoga. Now in Ashtanga Yoga, there are several postures like Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dhyana, Dharana, and finally Samadhi. So there is definitely a purpose for each of these processes, but ultimately it is to see the Supreme Lord in the heart, who is there as Paramatma. So originally, the process was established so as to control, our mind is always disturbed. The senses are always disturbed. So the process was done in a way so that it can bring us to a stage of controlling the mind and the senses. And in the process, by controlling the mind and senses, what happens is that one becomes detached from material activities and gradually sees that he is not this body, but he is a spirit soul, and becoming attached to the spiritual activities. So the Lord as Paramatma cannot be seen by material attachment. Only when one becomes fully detached from material desires, one can understand the Supreme Lord, or we can start progressing in spiritual life. So that is how the whole purpose of this Ashtanga Yoga was, to become free from material desires and become spiritually situated. That requires a lot of determination, devotion, because ultimately Lord cannot be seen without even a tinge of devotion. So even in Ashtanga Yoga process, one must have some tinge of bhakti. So whether you take up the step-by-step process or by the lift, one should have some bhakti. And then by these processes, one should be in a position to give up material desires by controlling the mind and senses. Now, in the Nectar of Devotion, there is a quote where it is said that what is meditation? It's said that one should always remember Lord Vishnu, which is what is called dhyana. Now, we discussed several stages in this Ashtanga Yoga. One of them is dhyana. So meditating on the form of Vishnu is called dhyana. That is, one should always remember the Lord, Supreme Lord. It is said that when one becomes fixed by meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, one becomes fixed on the Lord and he always remembers the Lord. And this way, he does not forget the Lord. And when one reaches the stage of remembering the Lord always, by meditating, one reaches the stage of full state of consciousness, which is what is called samadhi or trance. So at the ultimate stage of Ashtanga Yoga is to reach that point of samadhi, that is, see that we always keep the Lord in our mind. Now that is very, very difficult in this age. It is also said how the process works. There are 5 types of air in the body. That is prana, apana, vyana, udana, and samana. It is through these 5 types of air that the bodily activities are performed. And of these, the most important is the prana. So when the spirit soul leaves the body, the prana air leaves the body. Now what the yogi does by practice of this Ashtanga Yoga, by controlling the life air, is to elevate the spirit soul to a higher platform than what he is. For which, actually the process, how it works is, one has to stop eating, one has to stop drinking, one has to stop breathing, and one has to go out, which is explained in Bhagavad Gita, that one has to go to a forest or a mountain and live in a secluded place. One has to go alone. Now he cannot go taking his family and children and all. One has to go alone and then live in a secluded place and then gradually stop eating and drinking and all these things, so that he is situated gradually on a spiritual platform. Now, example is given in Srimad Bhagavatam about the austerities which Dhruva Maharaj performed, which is given in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It said how Dhruva Maharaj, he came to the forest of Madhuvana. He used to take bath in river Yamuna, and one is supposed to take bath 3 times, irrespective of what the weather is. For example, if someone is going to Himalayas, the weather is very, very cold. There is nothing but ice. But one cannot stop taking bath in a place like that. And not only once, one should take bath morning, afternoon, and evening. So that is the process. So he was advised by Narad Muni to perform this tapasya. So what he did, he came to this Madhuvana forest. And the first month, Dhruva Maharaj ate only fruits and berries on every 3rd day. That means once in 3 days, Dhruva Maharaj would eat these fruits and berries. And it is said that these berries or the fruits are ones which a human being won't eat, but normally monkeys would eat. Now, Dhruva Maharaj could do that, but we cannot. Today's condition, forget about, we get Ekadasi twice in a month. Even that is a big austerity for us. But Dhruva Maharaj did this once in 3 days. In the 2nd month, Dhruva Maharaj ate only every 6 days. And what he ate was dry grass and leaves. He sustained on dry grass and leaves by eating once in 6 days. But by going through this process, Dhruva Maharaj did not stop worshipping the Lord. His main focus was to worship the Lord. Then he continued his worship for the 3rd month, during which he drank water only once in 9 days. He stopped eating dry grass and leaves and then gradually shifted to drinking water only once in 9 days. But he continued to remain worshipping the Lord. And then in the 4th month, he started controlling his breathing exercise. And he inhaled air only once in 12 days. So this is how Dhruva Maharaj performed austerities. And it is said when he came to the stage of 5th month, he controlled his breathing to such an extent that he could stand on one leg without moving his body. That is how his mind was fully concentrated on the Supreme Lord. So he controlled his mind and his senses were controlled and he was always fixed in the Supreme Lord. So when this happened, it is mentioned that how he became as powerful that he could bring the whole movement of the earthly planet under his control. And it said that the earth more or less came to a standstill, the demigods started getting worried as to what is happening because the life air was choked. So then they approached the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the Lord appeared in front of Dhruva Maharaj. So in Dwapara Yuga, it is said people were physically fit and were prepared to take up this process of self-realization. Why? Because relatively things were much, much better in the Dwapara Yuga. The people were and could do these things like going alone to a forest or a mountain, abstain from eating. Now, one might ask, how can one abstain from eating? Eating and drinking are supposed to be a process only to keep the body and soul together, which Srila Prabhupada often mentions in his classes. One should not eat for the process of sense gratification or trying to fill the belly completely. When you overeat, then what happens is that there is a tendency to oversleep also. But when you eat little less than what your body, your belly requires, then you drink water, then you are able to sustain the body. So keeping the body and soul together is what is the purpose of eating and drinking. When your eating is regulated, then what happens is that your sleeping is also regulated. Your senses are controlled by worshipping the Lord. Your mind is also controlled. And the process is also explained in Bhagavad Gita that even when one goes to a mountain, one does not just keep going around, but sits in one place. He keeps his eyes half closed and focuses on the tip of the nose. And this way he starts meditating on the Supreme Lord. Now, why? Because if you keep your eyes closed and try to meditate, there is a tendency to sleep. And it's not possible for one to keep his eyes fully open for a very long time. So that is why it is said that one should keep the eyes half closed. Srila Prabhupada also gives mention that this is a mechanical process. The purpose why Srila Prabhupada mentioned that it's a mechanical process is because it is performed through the body, which is like a machine. Now, this body does not work all through our life in the same way. At 20s and all, we have a lot of energies. Then at 30, from thereafter, the energy life starts dwindling down. The body is not very much fit. And not only that, and in this yuga, like I mentioned before, one does not want to go alone and spend some time what to talk about mountain or a forest. These days, people even don't want to visit the holy places for spiritual purification. That is one thing. And then processes like eating and drinking and all, they are not regulated these days. So the result, mind is disturbed, the senses are not controlled. So many avenues for the mind to be engaged are there. So people cannot generally focus on these areas. So the easiest process to take up is the process of Bhakti Yoga. So there are a few examples that are given in Srimad Bhagavatam and our scriptures by which, by practicing one Bhakti Yoga, one can easily detach from matter. So the Lord himself states that in Bhagavad Gita, Yoginam Vapi Sarvesham, of all the yogis, the one who with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga, and he is the highest of all. So this is what is applicable in Kali Yuga, that by being situated in the process of loving service, our purpose of taking up all these yoga process is to render some service to the Lord. And if we are able to do that, then that can take us to the highest process, that is remembering the Lord always. Now, they are talking about service, loving devotion service. It is said that one time, one of the disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura asked him, said that, I don't have any service, to which Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura replied, if you don't have any service, then you cry for it. That means we are chanting the Maha Mantra in Kali Yuga. The purpose of chanting is to always get some opportunity to render some service. Services can be many. So if we are able to get that service and be engaged in that service with proper love and devotion, then we can reach a stage of remembering the Lord always. So even if we are in the midst of calamities, we will always think of Krishna. The Lord also states in the seventh canto of Bhagavad Gita, seventh chapter of Bhagavad Gita, first sloka, he says, Maya Sakta Manapartha, Yogam Yunjam Madasrayaha. He says, now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubts. So by practicing this Bhakti Yoga, one can reach a stage of remembering Krishna by reaching a process of rendering service. Now, I have given one example of Dhruva Maharaj. There is one more example that is given in Srimad Bhagavatam about Maharaj Agnidra. Now, Agnidra was a great king and he was also a devotee of the Lord. Now, what happens is that whatever desire one has in his heart, the Lord fulfills that desire because he knows what is going in our heart. So this Agnidra, he had a desire to go to Pitraloka and enjoy the heavenly planets. Now, not all come to that stage of understanding, yes, our goal of life should be to go back to the spiritual world where there is no more birth, death, old age, and disease. But you see, people think that spiritual practice means doing some ritualistic sacrifices. Ritualistic sacrifices were also there in one yuga, but in this yuga, neither there are brahmanas who are having that purity to perform that ritualistic sacrifices, nor do they have the proper understanding of who the Supreme Lord is. So many people perform ritualistic sacrifices even without knowing who the Lord is, and even not knowing even the purpose of performing the sacrifices. That is why the Lord says the purpose of sacrifice is to know me, which many of the Brahmanas in today's listing may not be even aware of it, which is true. So this king had a desire that somehow he must go to the Pitraloka and enjoy in the heavenly planets. So there are many ways by performing sacrifices to the demigods. One can reach these heavenly planets, or one can go to Pitraloka also. But then what happens is that when one goes to these planets, he can enjoy for some time as long as the results of one's pious activities are there in up to date. But once, as you keep on enjoying, what happens is that your bank balance also, like if you draw money from your savings account or whatever account you have and start spending it, the balance keeps reducing. So similarly, when the results of your pious activities get exhausted, you must come back to the earthly planet. So this Agnidra, he had a desire to go to Pitraloka because he had heard that yes, one can enjoy. So he became a Pitraloka Kama, or a desire for being transferred to Pitraloka. And he went to one of the mountains which I mentioned like before. He went to a mountain called Mandara Hill and he performed severe austerities. Now, austerities, going to a planet and performing austerities. So Lord Brahma, he knew that this king had this desire to go to Pitraloka, and he was deeply meditating. And what happened was, when he was there, that environment was so very attractive, with lots of nice, beautiful trees, flowers, pleasant smell, and all those things. At that time, Lord Brahma, understanding this king's desire, he sent a beautiful woman in the name of Purvachiti. And this woman was an Apsara. We discussed in the last class about the Gandharvas and Apsaras. This woman was an Apsara. She also looked very, very beautiful. She was so beautiful and she had a very attractive voice. And she was wearing her tinkling bells. And she just passed by this Maharaj Agnidra. And in the process, his meditation was spoiled. And he got attracted to this Apsara woman. So they got married. She gave birth to some 9 children or so. And thereafter, it is said that she left because she had come from the Pitraloka planet. She wound up after the children and she left. Now, what happened was Maharaj Agnitra, he was left with his children. He was very, very disappointed of all the time being alone. And then he was contemplating on the Pitraloka as to how and when he can join his wife where she had been. So Brahma gave him the intelligence also, and finally he wound up his pastime. He joined his wife in the Pitraloka planet. The point is that if one wants to enjoy in the heavenly planets, that also the Lord provides, that gives that facility. But if one wants to uh, directly take up the process of Bhakti Yoga, that also the Lord can give. But even in the Bhakti Yoga, it's a question, meditation can be used in the right perspective. And this example is given in one of the Puranas, which is mentioned in the Nectar of Devotion, about a Brahmana. Now, this Brahmana was a very, very poor Brahmana. He was not very, very sound financially. So, but he was a great devotee of the Lord. And what he used to think was, in his mind, he knew who the Supreme Lord was, but he was always meditating on the Supreme Lord as if he was offering the Lord with very, very opulent paraphernalia. He used to collect, he used to think of always having golden or silver jugs, collecting waters from all the holy rivers at the same time. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that one can, even by meditation on these, can actually perform, which the Lord can accept also, which we will see through this pastime. So this Brahmana was thinking of collecting the holy water from all the rivers like Godavari, Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, etc., bringing them, bringing all nice opulent flowers, opulent fruits, and etc., and offering to the Lord. This is how he was actually meditating, but he was very firmly fixed. So what happened was, one day he was thinking of offering nice sweet rice. You know, in the temple we make sweet rice every day for offering to the Lord. So this Brahmana was contemplating on making a nice sweet rice and offering to the Lord. All this is happening in his meditation only. He's thinking that I'm putting the rice, I'm putting sugar, I'm putting water, and cooking the sweet rice for the Lord. So then he thought this, it is said that the sweet rice tastes better when it is cold, not when it is hot. So he was thinking that I should now see whether the sweet rice is cooked or not. And he did not think of, the spoons and all those things, but what he thought was that let me put my hand and touch if the sweet rice is cooked or whether it is hot or something. So in that meditation only, he put his finger into the bowl in which he was cooking, and his fingers got burnt. Now, until now, all these are happening through the process of meditation. But what happens is that suddenly, when he thought of his fingers getting burned, his meditation got a break, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that actually his fingers were got burnt. Now, when this happened, Lord Vishnu was seated with Lakshmi Devi in Vaikuntha planet, and he started smiling. So all the Lakshmis asked, Lord, why are you laughing? Immediately what the Lord did was he sent an airplane to bring that Brahmana to Vaikuntha. And then the airplane was sent and the Brahmana was brought from Vaikuntha, brought from the earth planet to Vaikuntha. And the Lord explained how this Brahmana was so very poor, but still he had the desire to serve the Lord. What was his desire? Only to serve the Lord in the best way possible on a mental platform by meditating. So meditation is an example. This is an example whereby one can even meditate if he is not well situated, provided he knows who is the enjoyer and how it can be achieved. So this Brahmana became successful in this meditation, whereas Dhruva Maharaj became successful, whereas Agnitra failed in his meditation because Agnitra had a desire to go to Pitraloka. So these are examples given in the Shastra. Then, of course, many examples given as to how one can take up the process of either step-by-step process, or one can take up the lift process, that is, take up the process of Bhakti Yoga. By taking the process of Bhakti Yoga, devotional service, one automatically becomes perfectly situated he can achieve perfection in this lifetime itself, as Srila Prabhupada mentions. If you chant the 16 rounds of Mahamantra every day and follow the 4 regulative principles, that is enough for one to get perfected in this Kali Yuga. Now, in the second sloka, Srila Prabhupada mentions about how spiritual realization cannot be attained by materialistic persons who are attached to sense enjoyment. Now, it is like if one desires material enjoyment and wants to also do some spiritual practice, it is like keeping one leg in one boat and another leg in another boat and trying to cross the river. Invariably, one will fall down. So, it is not possible. But spiritual practice, that is what is given in this Kali Yuga of chanting the Maha Mantra, associating with devotees, is so very well given that one can become detached from material desires. But still, spiritual practice requires 4 things, that is austerity, mercy, truthfulness, and cleanliness. And these are attained by following the 4 principles which I had mentioned, which is the 4 principles of renunciation or the tapasya for this Kali Yuga. One cannot take the austerity of meditating or austerity of eating, austerity of drinking, austerity of doing a physical exercise. But for this Kali Yuga, one can easily observe these 4, that is avoid meat eating, avoid gambling, avoid intoxication, and avoid illicit sex. These are the 4 principles that if one takes as a means of austerity, that is enough for one to perfect a spiritual life. Now, how these 4 can be achieved is one stops eating meat. It gives a sort of a mercy or a compassion in our this thing. Mercy is required. So when we stop eating meat or eating non-vegetarian and things like that, we have a certain amount of compassion for other living entities. Also, we are situated on a higher platform. Otherwise, by eating things like onion and garlic, we'll be situated in the lower platform. By giving up intoxication, one becomes austere. Like I said, austerity is one process, one thing that is required. So by giving up intoxication not only includes alcohol, but on a deeper sense, one also should give up other things that one might get intoxicated, like even many times we have prasadam, but we get so intoxicated by eating a prasadam that one day if there is no sweet rice, if we are addicted to sweet rice, we may not feel satisfied if we don't have it one day. That is an intoxication. If somebody is used to watching a TV and can't give up TV for a day or two, that is intoxication. So in a deeper sense, one should try to avoid intoxication or not becoming attached to anything. Then one should avoid illicit sex. That means illicit sex life is basically given for procreation, not for recreation. So one attains a stage of cleanliness by understanding this in a proper perspective. And finally, one addresses truthfulness by avoiding gambling. So if we gamble, then what happens is that one tends to speak lies and things like that. But basically, one has to have some truthfulness in life. That cannot be done with not only gambling, with any activity that gives speculation of gaining wealth. Now, gambling need not be just playing cards or things like or taking a lottery, but then in a deeper sense, if one becomes attached too much to material wealth, then these are all things that can lead ones to more to a material attachment. Whereas for attaining perfection in spiritual life, one cannot progress unless and until one gives up the material attachment to material desires, for which these 4 principles are required and for which these 4 things have to be observed, that is no meat eating, no intoxication, no gambling, and no illicit sex. So these 4 should be in a position to practice. If somebody is able to chant his rounds, one can even reach a stage of giving up these things and reaching a stage of full surrender to the Lord, by which one can perfect it and remember the Lord under all circumstances. So the Brahmana's example is one. where even though he was financially very, very weak, he could think of the Lord and serve the Lord. So we see that mostly in this age, people are either brahmacharis, and generally mostly between brahmacharis and grihasthas, it is mostly grihasthas. There are no vanaprasthas, and sannyasis, of course, sannyasi is not given in Kali Yuga. But within the grihasthas also, like people are differently situated in terms of their profession, in terms of their location. But if we are able to associate with devotees and observe these and chant the rounds Mahamantra regularly, one can attain perfection even in this very life. So this is what these two verses mention. And the rishis are there to set an example and give guidelines how mankind can progress spiritually. So this is how the systems were set up in the past also, and the systems are given in the present also. Now, if you see Srila Prabhupada's example himself, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura during his time insisted that one should chant 64 rounds of day, Mahamantra every day. Then one can go back to Godhead. But when Srila Prabhupada appeared, he realized that 64 rounds in today's situation may not be possible because people are working very hard, 10 hours, 12 hours a day, traveling for 2 hours, 4 hours a day. And then, so he simplified it and given us at least to chant 16 rounds. Of course, it doesn't restrict us to chant up to only 16 rounds. One can chant whatever possible extra also, which adds value. So Srila Prabhupada was also a rishi, great rishi, who could set an example as to how we can observe these regulative principles and also chant the rounds. And by properly following this, one can even control what Dhruva Maharaj did of eating, controlling the eating, controlling sleep, controlling our senses, controlling the mind. That is also possible by observing these very sincerely with the current process given by Srila Prabhupada. So this is what I had for today's subject matter. For the next few minutes, I can take some questions, comments, if any of you have.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Pranam.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Please help me understand that Brahma created all the Manu and other things. So
yes.
Actually, who is the progenitor? Is it the Manu is the progenitor of the mankind, or is it the Brahma from Brahma? How do you understand this problem?
Mankind comes from Manu. Manu also comes from Brahma. That is how the understanding is. So different personalities, it's mentioned Srimad Bhagavatam, how different personalities are created due to their previous deeds. For example, demigods are created and each one has got a post, like somebody in charge of finance, somebody in charge of something else, somebody in charge of something else. So each demigod has got a role. Similarly, inhabitants in Pithuloka, there are so many heavenly planets which are categorized into 7, and one can attain these planets, and all of them are created with a particular purpose. Like Manus are created to set an example. It is given for about Varnasrama system. They established the Varnasrama system, which emphasizes a little bit on economic development also. Of course, we need economy to sustain our spiritual life. But the thing is, people have mistaken this and took spiritual life, economy as the prime goal of life. Though it is not the prime goal, it is spirituality, for which one should be in a position to sustain. Just like the yoga practice. Yoga practice in one yuga was for meditation, but people have taken that as a body, which is now a more of a bodily exercise. So Manus or Rishis, demigods, all of them are created by Brahma based on one's desire, one's karma. So this is how, Brahma creates everybody with a particular purpose. And Manu was created to establish this economic activity, Varnasrama system and all those things. This is what is given in Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
I want to know what is the intention of life.
What is the intention of life?
Yes.
Human life is to perfect our spiritual practice. That is, what are we? Who are we? Which we call as self-realization. We are supposed to ask a question, who am I? Am I this body? Actually, we are not this body. We are a spirit soul which is situated within our heart. And this soul is nothing but a small part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, that is Lord Krishna. And just as our finger is meant to serve our body, this soul is meant to serve the Supreme Lord. So, if the soul is not serving the Supreme Lord through this body, the body is given for us to perform activities to serve the Supreme Lord. And if that is not done, then it is just like the finger not serving the body. So we are in a diseased condition, and this human life is given to us to understand that this is the purpose of life. And if we don't understand it, it is like wasting a body in human form of life. So just now I mentioned about, Prabhu asked about Manus. Then we discussed today about Rishis. Rishis are also personalities. They are on a higher platform, like we have demigods. These Rishis advise even the demigods. So they are on a higher platform than even the demigods. They are the Brahmanas for the demigods. So similarly, Manus are created with a different purpose. And it is easily possible to understand the purpose of life in the human form of life. Like I mentioned, one can attain these heavenly planets also. But what happens is, if you have 100 rupees and you go somewhere, if you spend that 100 rupees, you have to again earn. So similarly, this earthly planet is a place for earning pious activities, our credit through pious activities, or become a bankrupt by performing impious activities. That can be understood easily in the human form of life. And as you go to the higher planets, what happens is that we discussed about the Maharaj Agnitra, who was in the Pitraloka. He had a desire, he thought, he has heard, yes, in Pitraloka people can enjoy, but then one has to come back again to this earthly planet. That can be understood only in the human form of life. So that is why human form of life is very, very valuable. I hope I've been able to answer your question, Mataji.
Thank you, Guruji.
Yes, Mataji, thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments?
What is meditation and what is the method?
What is meditation and what is the method? Meditation, as we started from the beginning of the class, is a process by which one should think or focus his mind on the form of the Lord in the heart. Now, it is given in the Shastras that the Lord is situated in our heart in a four-handed form as the Paramatma. Now, that form of the Lord, we are not able to see now because our mind is contaminated, our senses are contaminated, which we are not able to see. So earlier the process was to do these physical exercises so that we can focus on the form of the Lord. But now it is practically not possible. But still, by doing some service to the Lord, we can render a lot of service to the Lord. For example, we wake up in the morning, we can think, oh, let me wake up the Lord. We put in the night, we try to put the Lord to rest. Lord also needs some rest. These are all services we are trying to do for the Lord. Lord does not sleep. But we can think in terms of, okay, now I'll put the Lord to rest in the night. Next day morning, I'll wake up the Lord. Now, normally, there is a system of offering sweet rice, cooking nice sweet rice and offering to the Lord. Then whatever we eat, we offer to the Lord. We offer nice clothing to the Lord by dressing the deities. Of course, deity worship is taken at a very advanced level of stage. So, like this, there are many services that can be done. Hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita is a big process by which one can achieve perfection, help one progress. Chanting the Mahamantra, associating with devotees, like this, so many things are there, areas are there by which one can render service to the Lord. So ultimately, one has to reach the point of rendering service, for which we chant the process of chanting the Mahamantra. So if we chant the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, if we sincerely chant, that they are actually addressing the Lord. They are praying to the Lord to be engaged in some service. And when the Lord becomes pleased, He will definitely give an opportunity to render some service in the association of devotees. So this is the process of meditation for this yoga, Did I answer your question, Mataji? Or you have further doubts? Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Pranam. What is the real meaning of life? I can understand. I want to know what is the end of life. What is the who is soul? And
what is the end of life, or what is the soul? You said.
What is soul? What is the human soul?
Human soul. Now, yes. Soul is one. It's not a human soul. It's a human body. The soul is engaged within this human body. The soul is one. It is not a human soul. The soul is only one, which is a small part of the Supreme Lord. The Lord is called Super Soul, and one fragment, small fragment, is what is the soul, which is present within our body. Now, there is nothing like a human soul. The soul is there within this body in the form of a human life. Now, like I mentioned, you can go to a heavenly planet and get a heavenly body like a demigod if you have a lot of pious credits, due to a lot of pious activities, like you do a lot of charity, give donations, you can earn a lot of pious credit, by which what happens is that you go to the upper planets, you get a heavenly body. The soul is the same. The soul goes to the heavenly planets and you get a heavenly body. And thereafter, like I mentioned, when your pious results of your pious activities are over, then you have to come back to this earthly planet. The soul remains the same as it is. Only the bodily changes happen. Even in the earthly planet, if our activities are like that of an animal, of just eating and sleeping, and having some not too many material desires, our body can also degrade to a lower species of life with the same soul. The soul is the same, whether it is a dog, or whether it is an ant, or it's a human body, or a demigod. The soul is the same. Soul does not change on the body, depends on the body. It's the activities that change our body. That's all. Did I answer your question, Mataji? Are you clear?
Now, Guruji, I want to know another question. It is very personal question.
Yes, ask me. Is it related to today's class?
I am writing some Krishna bhajan and Jagannath bhajan, but I cannot progress in my career life. What is the reason?
What you are doing, it is good. You like some Krishna bhajan, you like Jagannath bhajan and all those things, but you feel...
But I cannot progress in my career life. I cannot progress in art. Why? What is the reason?
You are talking in terms of progress of spiritual life?
I am going to spiritual and some days, 5 to 10 days.
Now, one thing is, spiritual life cannot be practiced all alone. It has to be practiced in the association of devotees. Now, there are so many activities. From what the questions that you asked me, it looks like you need to still understand Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, for which you need to associate with devotees. There are so many places we have association of devotees, and they meet regularly on a fixed day and time, and they discuss Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Tirtha. So many scriptures are there, and when you read and understand the association of devotees, then you will be able to progress spiritually. You will also understand, you will develop a much bigger taste. There are other things also, like chanting in this Kali Yuga, the process of delivery is chanting the Maha Mantra. You may be having a like for hearing bhajans, but you must chant the Maha Mantra, because chanting the Maha Mantra gives some practical service. In this Kali Yuga, rendering practical service is very, very important, for which one has to chant the holy name of the Lord. That's the easiest means given the Shastras. Hare Nama Kevalam Kalo Nasteva Katirameta. In this age of Kali, the only process of deliverance is the chanting the Maha Mantra, and there is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. So my suggestion is that look for association of devotees through whom you can develop a taste for chanting the Maha Mantra. And then, of course, the other things will follow in place, or like discussing scriptures in their association, having Krishna Prasadam, etc., worshipping the form of the Lord. So many things are involved. So I think you must try to get some association of the devotees, which will help you. Of course, there are many Matajis in many places who are leading these, particularly for Matajis, how they can serve by stitching dresses for the Lord, by making garlands for the Lord. There are so many services. So if you have possibly developed taste only for hearing bhajans, but if you are not chanting the Maha Mantra, it's a slow process by which one day you might develop a taste for chanting the Maha Mantra. So that's why you need to associate with devotees.
Thank you, Guruji.
Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. One
Hare Krishna,
question.
Mataji.
How does the soul stay in which form in other lokas? Like
the soul has only one form, that is the four-handed form, which is what given in the Shastras. Now, everywhere the form is the same, whether it is in heavenly planet, in the heavenly planet or the earthly planet, or like I mentioned, even this earth. If you find other species, the form of the soul is the same everywhere. The form does not change.
thank you, Hare Krishna.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, to sum up this chapter, like the discussion between Maitreya and Vidura regarding this creation. So, if my understanding is right, that all the elements that is this earth, water, fire, everything is created by Krishna,
Yes.
and Krishna gave the power to to Brahma to create, to progenate all sort of these bhutas, pretas, and other rishis and like that.
Yes, yes.
And that's how the progeny started growing.
Correct, correct.
Is it my correction, understanding correct, Prabhuji?
Yes, correct, Prabhu. Krishna is the primary creation and Brahma does the secondary creation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, correct. The understanding is correct.
Then the question arises is why Krishna wanted to create this bhuta, pretas, and other things. Is it the desire of the living soul to be like that, Prabhuji?
Yes, it is the desire, like this Agnidhara. He wanted to become a go to Pitraloka, where Pitraloka is a place, there is a place for, Pitraloka is a place where ghosts, spirits, and all these things live. Now, many times people have materialistic desires and they have performed materialistic rituals. For example, so many things are there in the Shastras, like people do Shraddha. Now, performing a Shraddha without understanding the purpose of it may be more like a materialistic, ritualistic activity. So one can attain pious results of some pious activities by doing these rituals very, very sincerely, but without understanding a proper purpose. So there are so many reasons why one can get a heavenly body. Like we discussed in the last class also, Apsaras and Gandharvas. If you are very desire of singing, if somebody is very desirous, Narad Munis we discussed as an example of how he was a Gandharva in his previous life. So if one has got a desire and one performs pious activities, he can go to these heavenly planets also, which are 7. And if one performs impious activities and has desires, can degrade also to the lower planets. So all these are Brahma's creation, Prabhu. Definitely.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Anybody else? If there are no questions, can I take the classes closed, Prabhu?
Thank you, Prabhuji, for all your wonderful answers, and thank you for all the questions.
Thank you all very much, Prabhu.
There are no questions. Can end.
Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki Srila Prabhupada ki